The crowd are on their feet. Eala barely has the energy to get to the net to congratulate her opponent on a classic.
So we've just seen Chen and Eala dominate the number 2 seeds and half of the winning team in the Australian Open. Zhang, who was actually in the team with Buksha, did win the Australian Open a couple weeks ago. So massive win for them and massive win for Southeast Asian tennis.
So here's what just went down in the tennis world that has everyone talking. Novak Djokovic just dropped some comments about Eala that sent shockwaves through the entire sport. When the greatest player who's ever picked up a racket starts calling someone a superstar, you better believe that carries some serious weight. This wasn't just some casual praise either. This was a declaration that could completely reshape how people see her career moving forward. Let's dive into exactly what he said and why this moment is way bigger than it appears on the surface.
I saw the other day with Alex Eala, that's been a talk, and which is understandable. There's some players coming from respective countries, like she's coming from Philippines, which is now a big deal. She's been the biggest ever, tennis player from that country, which is a big country, and there's a big interest. So things like that happen. I mean, it's you could argue that it was, maybe a poor schedule, and maybe they could schedule him on a bigger court. Yes, but again, she's so young and she's just coming through. So and obviously the first couple rounds, the schedule is so packed. The big courts with big names, it's difficult. It's not easy to manage that. But again, it's a good problem to have, to be honest. Let's just imagine if there's a lack of people coming, or that stands are empty. That's a bigger problem.
Quick question before we jump in. Drop me a comment and let me know if Eala was even on your radar before this whole situation exploded. Or did you only discover her because of all the madness that's been unfolding? I'm genuinely curious where everyone stands on this. Okay, so here's how it all went down. Djokovic was sitting in a standard press conference at the Australian Open when a journalist threw him what seemed like a pretty routine question. They asked about how the tournament has evolved over the 2 decades he's been showing up in Melbourne. Basic stuff, really. The reporter wanted his take on the massive crowd sizes, all the corporate money flowing in, and the growing complaints that the whole event has become way too commercialized and packed with people. Now, most players would have given some cookie-cutter response about how wonderful it is to see tennis expanding, or some other safe answer. But Djokovic completely flipped the script on this one. He fired back, saying that griping about overflowing crowds is actually a luxury problem to have. Every single tournament organizer on the planet would kill to have the kind of ticket sales and attendance records that break systems. Then he hit them with this absolute gem of a line. He said there are way worse nightmares for any tournament to deal with than having too many match-in-it fans showing up. That response is pure Djokovic, through and through. This guy has been around long enough to remember when the Australian Open was literally begging to borrow space from local football clubs just so players had a decent place to get warmed up. He went into detail about having to use some random gym that belonged to an Australian rules team across the street. He even messed up which team it was at first, called them Essendon, then had to backtrack and correct himself to Collingwood. He actually apologized to the fans, because apparently mixing up those 2 teams is like starting a war in Australia. The whole point he was driving at is how dramatically the Australian Open has been transformed. We're talking about going from a tournament that was literally scraping together borrowed facilities to this massive global spectacle with indoor arenas, recovery centers that look like spas, and facilities that rival 5-star resorts. This evolution isn't some betrayal of tennis tradition or selling out the sport's roots. It's actually proof that tennis is absolutely crushing it and pulling in more eyeballs and attention than anyone dreamed possible. But then Djokovic shifted gears and brought up Eala. And this is where the whole conversation got incredibly fascinating. He started talking about what happened when her match got scheduled on one of those tiny outer courts, and suddenly thousands of people materialized trying to squeeze in. He said the entire locker room has been buzzing about it, and for good reason. Security barriers were getting tested to their breaking point. The whole organizational system just completely fell apart. It was pure chaos in every sense of the word. Now here's what makes Djokovic's take so brilliant. He didn't spin this as some catastrophic failure by tournament organizers or a disaster that embarrassed everyone involved. Instead, he positioned it as evidence that something much bigger is happening in the tennis world right now. Sure, he admitted they probably should have seen this coming and given her a bigger court to handle the demand, but the real story isn't about logistics failures. The real story is about understanding why so many people showed up in the first place. Eala isn't just representing herself out there. She's carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. The Philippines has more than 110 million people, and they've never had a tennis player capture this kind of global spotlight before. When Djokovic calls her a superstar, he's not just tossing around empty compliments or being polite for the cameras. This is the greatest player in tennis history, recognizing that Eala has broken through from being just another talented young prospect to becoming a genuine cultural phenomenon. The pressure she's dealing with goes way beyond typical ranking points or match results. She's become the ambassador for an entire country that sees her success as their success. This creates a completely different atmosphere around everything she does. When millions of people are emotionally invested in your career, every match becomes bigger than just tennis. Let's be completely honest here, though. The Australian Open organizers absolutely botched this situation. They took a player who has the passionate support of 110 million people and stuck her on a court that maybe holds a few hundred spectators. What exactly did they think was going to happen? That everyone would just quietly stream it on their phones and not try to witness history in person? The whole mess perfectly illustrates how disconnected tournament organizers can be from the rapidly changing landscape of tennis fandom. They're still operating under this outdated assumption that only the established Western superstars can draw massive crowds and create genuine excitement. Meanwhile, the sport is going global at lightning speed and the infrastructure is struggling to keep pace. Eala represents exactly this shift, and the chaos at her match was basically a preview of what's coming. Djokovic nailed it when he talked about finding that sweet spot between managing enormous crowds while still maintaining a quality experience for everyone. He looked at what happened with Eala and immediately recognized it as a glimpse into the future. New territories, incredibly passionate fan bases, and complete mayhem when those fan bases decide to show up all at once. The traditional model of court assignments and scheduling just isn't designed to handle the kind of cultural impact that Eala brings to every match. What makes Eala's rise so remarkable is how incredibly fast it happened. Tennis usually likes to develop its stars slowly. You spend years grinding on the tour, gradually climbing rankings, methodically building a following over time. But with Eala, it's been like someone hit a light switch. One day, she's a promising junior player. The next day, an entire nation is tracking her every move and showing up in massive numbers to watch her compete. This creates some really fascinating challenges, because tennis infrastructure was never built for this kind of instant global celebrity. Everything from court assignments to television schedules to media responsibilities is still designed around that traditional slow path to stardom. When someone jumps ahead in line because of cultural significance rather than ranking points, it creates confusion and friction throughout the system. This is exactly why Djokovic's support means so much. He's lived through this himself. He understands what it feels like to carry an entire country's expectations on your shoulders. Serbia might not have the same population as the Philippines, but that pressure and those expectations create similar mental challenges. When he talks about fame being like a golden prison, he's speaking from real experience. The same wave of support that lifts you up can completely overwhelm you if you're not mentally prepared to handle it. For someone like Eala, who's still a teenager learning how to compete at the professional level, that pressure is absolutely massive. She's not just focused on winning matches and improving her ranking. She's managing the hopes of millions of people who see her victories as their victories. That's a completely different level of mental challenge compared to what most developing players have to deal with. The crowd situation at her match wasn't just random tennis fans getting excited about a good player. These were true believers who traveled across oceans and fought through security barriers because they were desperate to see their icon compete in person. They weren't necessarily there for the quality of tennis. They were there for what she represents to them and their country. That transforms what should be a routine early round match into a spectacle that generates more excitement than whatever's happening on the main courts. Djokovic saw all this, and instead of criticizing the chaos or complaining about poor organization, he celebrated it. He said these kinds of frenzies are completely inevitable when sport growth outpaces the systems designed to contain it. The first week of any Grand Slam is always chaotic, with packed schedules and multiple storylines competing for attention, but players like Eala show just how complex this puzzle has become. Fan engagement isn't just about rankings and trophies anymore. It's about cultural significance and national pride. When the greatest player in tennis history publicly endorses a young player like this, it accomplishes two crucial things. First, it gives legitimacy to all the excitement surrounding her. People can dismiss fan enthusiasm as irrational nationalism or undeserved hype. But when Djokovic calls you a superstar, that's validation from someone who knows exactly what it takes to perform at the absolute highest level of the sport. Second, it creates protection from the inevitable criticism and scrutiny that comes with this kind of sudden fame. There will always be voices saying the attention is premature or unearned, that she hasn't accomplished enough yet to justify this level of hype. But Djokovic's endorsement shuts down those arguments before they can gain traction. He's essentially telling the tennis world that the excitement is justified and everyone better get used to this new reality because it's not disappearing anytime soon. The contrast between today's Australian Open and what Djokovic experienced when he started playing there is absolutely mind-blowing. He talked about using borrowed gyms and sharing recovery facilities with football players. Now the tournament features state-of-the-art everything. That transformation happened because tennis invested in itself and expanded its global reach. But with that growth comes new challenges, like figuring out how to handle situations where a player's cultural impact far exceeds their current seeding or ranking. Djokovic's broader point about preferring overcrowded stadiums to empty ones is something every tournament organizer should memorize. The absolute worst thing that can happen to any sport is apathy. When people stop caring enough to show up, you're finished. The fact that thousands of people are fighting to squeeze into a side court to watch a young player from the Philippines is exactly the kind of problem you want to be solving. It means tennis is breaking into fresh markets and capturing the imagination of people who never gave the sport a second thought before. Sure, it creates logistical nightmares in the short term, but these are the best kind of problems to have. You can figure out how to build bigger venues, improve crowd control, and adjust scheduling systems. What you absolutely cannot manufacture is genuine passion and interest. If people don't care, you're dead in the water. The big question is whether the tennis establishment is actually ready for this new era. The sport has been dominated by players from a relatively small group of countries for decades. Now you have rising stars from places like the Philippines bringing massive, passionate fan bases that don't fit the traditional mold. Are tournaments going to evolve their approach, or will they keep scheduling these players on outer courts and acting shocked when chaos breaks out? Eala's situation is basically a test case for how tennis handles true globalization. If the sport can successfully integrate these new markets and fan bases without alienating existing audiences, that represents massive growth potential. But if the establishment treats these players as novelties or disruptions rather than the future of tennis, that's a huge missed opportunity that could haunt the sport for years. Djokovic clearly sees Eala as a core part of tennis's future, not some temporary phenomenon. His comments weren't condescending or dismissive. He spoke about her like a peer who just happens to be at an earlier stage of her career. That's incredibly significant coming from someone who's won more Grand Slams than anyone else and has earned the right to be selective with his praise. The fact that he chose to elevate her instead shows he understands exactly where the sport is headed. Tennis can't survive indefinitely on the same European and American stars. It needs fresh faces from diverse backgrounds who can capture new audiences and keep the sport relevant on a global scale. Eala fits that description perfectly, which is why her success or failure matters far beyond just her individual career trajectory. What unfolds next is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. Can Eala handle this immense pressure and develop into the player everyone believes she can become? Will tournaments learn from the Australian Open chaos and adjust how they schedule and promote players with massive cultural followings? Can the tennis establishment embrace this new era of global superstars? Or will they stick to outdated models that don't reflect the sport's rapidly changing demographics? Djokovic's praise gives Eala both credibility and protection, as she navigates all these challenges when the criticism inevitably comes, and it always does with young hyped players. She can point to the fact that Novak Djokovic called her a superstar and recognized what she represents. That's serious armor against the doubters and critics who want to tear down anyone receiving attention they think is undeserved. The broader debate about the Australian Open becoming too commercial and corporate is interesting, but kind of misses the point. Every major sporting event has gone through this same evolution. Sponsorship money and corporate investment fund the prize pools and facilities that attract top players in the first place. You can't have world-class tennis without world-class financial backing, and that backing comes with certain expectations. What really matters is whether the sport maintains its competitive integrity and authentic spirit while pursuing growth. So far, tennis has done a pretty solid job of that compared to other sports. The on-court product remains compelling. Rivalries feel genuine, and the best players generally win regardless of their marketing appeal. As long as that continues, the commercial aspects are just part of the background. So there's the full story. Novak Djokovic didn't just pay Eala a compliment. He basically crowned her as the future of tennis and called out the entire establishment for being unprepared. The chaos at her match wasn't a problem to be solved. It was proof that the sport is growing in ways nobody saw coming. If you think tennis is about to become way more exciting with players like Eala breaking through barriers, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments whether you think she can live up to all this incredible hype.